Dr. Bernice A. King.
And I'm Dr. Kimberly P. Johnson.
And we are the co-authors of
It Starts With Me. Well, it starts with me.
No, I think it really starts with me.
No.
Well, maybe it just starts with you.
It starts with you.
This is a book for children and the rest of the world about love. A powerful word that really can change and transform our world. Now, this girl here is Amora. So Amora is going to take us on a journey around the world with her friends, talking about how we can be loved.
Thank you so much for reading this book. It Starts With Me. Dr. King's vision is coming to life, and you guys are going to carry that vision into the world. Have fun reading.
We want our children and you, parents, to be loved in the way you speak, in the way you act, and in the way you think. That's what it starts with me about. It starts with me. I am the one who infects the world with love.
It starts with me.
So my brothers and my sisters, as we embrace this urgency of creating the beloved community, now is the time to be loved. Love means understanding, redemptive goodwill toward all which seeks nothing in return. So be loved by implementing the demands of justice to eliminate the school to prison pipeline that has so many black children entrapped. Be loved by correcting voting policies that seek to suppress the votes of millions of black and brown people. Be loved and implement the demands of justice by transforming a society that is disproportionately violent toward black lives, including black transgendered lives and indigenous lives. Be loved and correct false narratives and economic policies that continue to divide and pit poor and working class black and white people against each other. Be loved and implement demands of justice where systems and structures are deconstructed and lead the way of living in community that reimagines just, humane, equitable, and sustainable policies, practices, and behaviors. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them who hate you, and pray for them that despitefully use you and abuse you. Be loved and do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with our God.
Good evening and welcome to Beloved Community Talks, presented tonight by the King Center and the Ford Motor Company Fund. Tonight we are having a critical conversation about women being the soul of the nation, not only in the past, but now. This event is in honor of the 95th birthday of Coretta Scott King, who brought this nation the King Center and the national holiday honoring her late husband, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But she was a civil rights leader in her own right who said, quote, "My story is a freedom song of struggle. It is about finding one's purpose, how to overcome fear, and to stand up for causes bigger than oneself." Our first presenters tonight are Dr. Johnetta Cole and Becky Pringle. Now, Dr. Cole is affectionately called Sister President, having served as president of 2 historically Black women's colleges. She became the first female African-American president of Spelman College and later was president of Bennett College. She also was the director of the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of African Art. You know, she's an educator, anthropologist, author, and speaker. Becky Pringle also is an educator who was a middle school science teacher who serves as president of the National Education Association, the National Teachers Union. Public education is her singular focus. She is working to transform education into a racially and socially just and equitable system to help all students to succeed, no matter their race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, or nationality. Now, as we honor the legacy of Coretta Scott King and those who have fought to ensure equitable and accessible education, I am reminded of 2 quotes of Mrs. King's. First is, "Struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation." She also said, "Women, if the soul of the nation is to be saved, you must become its soul." As we look at our educational system, we must acknowledge the progress and the freedom. Both have been earned. Then there is the ever-present struggle. More than half a century after Brown versus the Board of Education, we still see the persistence of inequitable educational opportunities and achievement gaps based on race, the origin of a person, or their socioeconomic status, or even their neighborhood. Dr. Cole, your work and efforts have been constant to not only illuminate how racism has functioned in our country, but also you've worked to eradicate it. So what would you say is the greatest opportunity to serve that we as women can do to shift our educational system?
Sister Monica, and to my sister Becky, and to all of the sisters in this extraordinary circle of the evening. It is such an honor and a joy to be with you. I happen to be sitting in the office of one of the legendary educators of our nation and the world, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. But I'm also tonight participating in a conversation about an exceptional woman who was an educator. First of all, Sister Coretta Scott King was the primary educator of her 4 children, a role that so many women play. But when we think about all that she did as a civil rights worker, as a women's rights advocate, she did that by teaching us. That is who she was. Today, when I look at our schools, my heart weeps, because today our children are still going to school based on the color of their skin, the zip code in which they live, when every child in our nation should have the right to a quality education. It is, after all, the single most consistent means, as President Nelson Mandela said, it is the most consistent means for changing the world. And so, as we celebrate Sister Coretta Scott King's 95th birthday, I lift her up not only as a beloved friend, but as one of the greatest teachers of our time.
So, Dr. Cole, how do we go about eliminating the problems that we have in our educational system? How do we continue Mrs. Coretta Scott King's legacy of eliminating those deeply interwoven threads of racism from the fabric of our educational system? How do we do it?
I know this. We don't do it by what's going on in our nation right now. I am appalled by the invasion of our educational process by individuals who have a political agenda. Sister Monica, we are living in a time where books are being banned. This is not South Africa back in the period of apartheid, when somebody put on the list Black Beauty, a book about a horse, and the book was banned in South Africa because the thought was that the beauty of Black people was being lifted up. We don't save and advance our educational system by saying that we cannot go back into history and her story to understand the origins of systemic racism. Our democracy is under attack through attacks on our educational system. And then I must say, as I know my sister and such an extraordinary educator, Becky, will remind us, we are living in a time when our teachers are profoundly undervalued. Not only are they being told what they can and cannot teach, and anything that's got to do with race or systems of inequality cannot be taught. They are consistently being undervalued in terms of their pay. And so if there's any struggle we've all got to stay in, it is the struggle for the rights of all children, but certainly for those who have had that right so consistently denied, children of marginalized communities. We must protect their right to a quality education.
Well said. Well, Ms. Pringle, as president of the National Education Association, the National Association of Education, you've got a focus right now of ensuring the systematic and fair treatment of people of all races should be happening in the schools. But as Dr. Cole just said, not only are teachers being told what they can't teach and books being removed, but teachers are under fire for even just trying to do their jobs. What is your association trying to do to protect the rights of teachers and children?
Oh, Monica, it is so good to be with you in this space. I am just coming off of visiting the King Center and having just such an incredible conversation with Dr. King. So I am honored to be in this space. And can I just say amen? Can I start there? Can I just say start there? Yeah. Amen, Dr. Cole. Can you just travel around the country with me? Could you do that, please? Because every educator throughout this country needs to hear you talk with such passion and commitment and dedication and respect of the people who have dedicated their lives to educating America's children. Thank you so very much for standing with us. Of course, as a longtime educator, you would do that. But I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of the 3 million members of the National Education Association. I have the honor of representing. We are the nation's largest labor union. And when I took the office of a presidency 2 years ago, ladies, in the middle of a pandemic, who planned that? I laid out a vision for our organization, which was to unite not just our 3 million members, but the entire nation to reclaim public education as a common good, as the foundation of this democracy. So thank you, Dr. Cole, for lifting that up, that our democracy is under threat. It is real. But we can't stop there, can we? Because you and I both know that public education was actually never designed to be what we know it must be, which is a racially and socially just and equitable system that prepares every student, every single one, to succeed in a diverse and interdependent world. That is the work that I laid out for our organization, and that is the work that we are engaged in as I speak. Maya Angelou lovingly recalled the words of the woman whom she shared the title Chosen Sister, Coretta Scott King. And I am so pleased to be in this space celebrating her and all that she brought to this world, her own work, even as she worked alongside of her husband, Dr. Martin Luther King. Maya said, peace and justice should belong to all people everywhere, all the time. I want to thank Dr. Bernice King for inviting me to be here in this space today, and knowing that she, like her parents, understand that peace and justice are the framework that upholds our shared responsibility. It's our shared responsibility to provide every student with a just and equitable education that allows them to get that access and opportunity and all of the support that they need and they deserve to live into their brilliance. I, of course, am honored to be here with all of the Black women in this space that have joined me. But here's the thing. We all have sisters and aunts and cousins who have taught us and pushed us and pulled us to stand in our power and to always speak the truth for our children as well as other people's children. And so when I think about the work that we absolutely must do together in this moment, it is the work of justice. It is the work of equality. It is the work of freedom. It is the work of the foundation of this democracy, and that is education.
So my question, Ms. Pringle, is a simple one for those mothers, and we hope fathers also watching right now. What can you do as a parent in your local school to make sure your child gets educated properly?
So I taught science, Monica, to middle level learners, the wonders of science, for over 30 years. And this is what I know: that we as educators cannot possibly do this alone. And our first partners are our parents. Those parents are the ones who send their beautiful children to us to continue to nurture and inspire them and allow them to grow. And so we need our parents to stay actively involved. First, please continue to do the work we know you have already started in getting to know not only your children's teacher, but all of the educators in those schools, not just our teachers. It's our support staff, our counselors and nurses, it's our bus drivers and food service workers, all of those adults in that system. who help to provide the education our kids need and deserve. So get to know them, and then understand that as partners, we have to make sure that the people in positions of power, those who are elected or appointed or hired, respect educators and parents to make the best decisions for their students. Dr. Cole talked about the fact that as educators, we too often are not respected as the professionals we are, with that professional authority and collective autonomy to make those kinds of teaching and learning decisions that allow for us to be honest in teaching the complete history of this country, that allow us to create that space for our students to have those challenging conversations about that history playing out today, and us all seeing that light shining on the inequities, not just in the education system, but in every other system that compounds to determine whether our students show up prepared to learn every day. So we need our parents partnering with us in demanding those just systems that we know our students need.
So you're getting, I was going to say, Dr. Cole, you have to deal with the students who come from these schools. How can those on higher education reach back and make sure our children are ready for higher education?
Well, first of all, by remembering what we were taught through the action of our sheroes like Coretta Scott King. And that is, the doing for others is just the rent you gotta pay for your room on earth. And so if you manage somehow to gain an education and think that it is your little precious possession not to be shared by others, then you have not been fully educated. I also just want to say so badly, if I may, Sister Monica,
Please.
that I'm thinking about a so-called owner of enslaved people back in Mississippi who said this: education and slavery are incompatible. Today, when we deny our children, whether it's in the first grade or in a college or a university, a genuine education, we are, and I mean what I am saying, we are practicing a form of enslavement. Our children cannot be truly free without a quality education. And guess what? That's why so many prefer for our children not to receive a quality education. That relationship between education and systems of inequality, racism, sexism, heterosexism, it is an intimate relationship. And then I just have to say, Sister Educator Becky, if only we could clone you, and spread you not just around our country, but our world. Because until we understand the centrality of quality education, we will never be able to complete our struggle for freedom and for justice.
So, what would you want our takeaway to be, keeping in mind the hopes and dreams of Mrs. Coretta Scott King when it comes to education, not only for our children, but for the support of our teachers? Both of you.
Becky?
So, Dr. Cole, as you were talking, I was thinking of bell hooks, activists, and an educator. And the reason she came to my mind as you were talking is that she talked about education. What she said was to educate is the practice of freedom. I just want that to sit with you for a minute.
Yeah, again.
Now I'm going to say it again. To educate is the practice of freedom. And the reason bell hooks came to my mind in this moment, Dr. Cole and Monica, is because Dr. King right now, Dr. Bernice King right now, we had a conversation about the work that actually we co-created and presented together way back in 1980. The NEA worked directly with the King Center to develop training and produce and to conduct the training on nonviolence and how in 1980, so that was a while ago, but in 1980, how we make that real in that moment. And one of the things that Dr. King said to me last week was, Becky, one of the things we have to remember is that we have to center our work in love. Mm-hmm. And that's why, that's why bell hooks came to me, because we all know, her talking about choosing to love and how that moves against fear and alienation and separation, that the choice to love is the choice to connect and to find ourselves in the other.
Dr. Cole, you have the last word.
Must be, Dr. Cole.
Well, it does seem to me that our sister, Mrs. Coretta Scott King, was an exemplary educator because she herself never stopped learning.
That's right.
She may have begun in that civil rights movement with her husband, but she learned about other movements, and she was a champion for women, for indigenous people, for the LGBT community. She never, ever stopped learning. But she also understood that to make sustainable change, we have to build institutions. And that is why, of course, she founded the King Center, now led by our beloved Dr. Bernice King. It was she who said, stop what you're doing on this day. Learn what Dr. King taught us. It's not a day off, it's a day on to learn and to engage in change. Coretta Scott King was a masterful teacher, and we celebrate her. We love her, and most of all, we must carry on her work.
All I can say is thank you both for dropping those gems and wonderful quotes. You two have been a great start to tonight's conversation. Now, I want to remind those of you watching to please tweet, Facebook, Instagram, do all that stuff and share what you're hearing tonight. And also send in your comments or questions as we continue with our next incredible guest. I want to introduce to you and welcome Doris Crenshaw. Now, before she speaks, I need to tell you something else that Mrs. Coretta Scott King understood. She understood the need to teach children about nonviolent social change. As she said earlier, struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it in every generation. But she also said the failure to invest in youth reflects a lack of compassion and a colossal failure of common sense. Our next participant truly understood that. She is the founder and CEO of the Southern Youth Leadership Development Institute. She has over 50 years in community activism. She is a grassroots coordinator for SPHERE and a senior consultant to Alabama Power. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ms. Doris Crenshaw. You are simply amazing, Ms. Crenshaw. So I have to start out by asking you, because I know you started in this struggle as a 12-year-old, or was it 11-year-old?
12.
12-year-old as the vice president of the NAACP. What fostered your interest in being involved in the movement?
Well, I was recruited to work with the youth council of the NAACP by Mrs. Rosa Parks, and I was I was I was really inspired by her and her determination and her passion for young people and the right to vote. And like the previous panel, education was also one of her passions. So throughout my life, from the NAACP, I was propelled to work in different places with SNCC, CORE, um, Urban League, everything that was going on out there. We became a part of it. So I was inspired to work for what Mrs. Paso, the freedom of our people, and we did a lot of voter registration drives with her, and so that was my beginnings. Um, I hope I answered you.
But what caused you then to decide to work with youth? Because, so often you were young when you started, but so often children are overlooked for what they can do. I think back to the civil rights movement, and I think back to those college students who were doing the sit-ins, and I think back to those who were on the Freedom Bus rides. Why did you decide to place an emphasis on youth?
Well, as I said, I knew and experienced changes in this world, and especially in our movement in this country. The wheel of the wheel in that movement was youth and women. And so I learned early, and then I was introduced to very strong women. I know if you all heard of Septima Clark.
Yes.
I went to the Highlander Folk School and met Septima Clark, and all of those people talked about activating young people. A lot of meetings that they had then, they said, all of the meetings started with, why are we here? And what is our assignment?
Mm.
And I felt like I was assigned to inspire young people to become activists in the.
And now, what do you see with our young people? We see Black Lives Matter, but what do you see this, quote, new generation? How do you get them involved in the civil rights movement, considering most of them have grown up in a very integrated society? And unfortunately, many of them don't know the history of segregation.
Well, they're experiencing segregation right now. And one of the things that we do is get our youth involved in what's going on with the Montgomery Public Schools and how to impact the issues that concern them. We learned early that self-interest is the prevailing force. And so if we train people, young people, about what is in their self-interest and how do they become in changing the things that affect them. I also, if we talk about Mrs. King, I watched her as a 12-year-old and her movement about the movement, and I saw her in concerts, but I never really experienced really being around her close. I mean, I saw her speak in this and the other. But after Dr. King was assassinated, I was working at that time with Dorothy Height, and she sent me to Atlanta to advance her for the funeral and the like. And but anyway, then I got close up and personal with Mrs. King. And we stayed there in Atlanta for a while on an assignment with for Miss Dr. Height for us to work with Mrs. King. But in that time, um, she talked about building an institution, uh, a King Center, to further the lessons that Dr. King taught. And I witnessed the men in the movement saying that we're not going to give her a dime, talking about building a center. And I watched them. I was one of the students that was assigned to West Hunter Baptist Church. That was Dr. Abernathy's church. And they collected the money. And they said, we're not going to give her any of this. She thinks she's going to do this and blah, 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 blah. But I watched her be persistent in her efforts to build this thing we now call the King Center. And she talked about this unconditional love. And I remember at the first mass meeting, when I was 12 now, Dr. King talked about agape love. I knew not what that meant, but I knew that was something I need to look up and something that we should be involved in. And I know that in every movement in this country, it's women and youth that affect the change that's going on in this country and in fact the world.
My last question, my last question to you has to do with young people today and getting them to register to vote. You started out getting young people to register to vote along with others. I am finding more and more, and I don't want to name one generation over another, but it's very hard to convince some young people that they should register to vote. I only think of one young man who is very good in one area, Colin Kaepernick, but he is not registered to vote and has never voted. And many young people look up to him and say, why should we vote? Because you can't get the change that you need or want. How do we convince our young people that voting is important?
Well, we teach them about the people that represent them and what do they do? What legislation? How this legislation affects you? And everything that we do is affected by the people that's elected, and they control everything. And I tell them everything that we do, even the texture of the toilet paper that they have in the schools and they put on the shelves in the store, is affected by people that's elected to office. And then how the business people also affect what legislators do. So what I do is try to show them examples of things that go on in their schools, the things that self-interest, the things that affect them directly. If you can explain that to them, I think, and some people we're never going to get it. They're not. But I think we have a great opportunity to influence a larger number of people, but talking to people. We have a no-talk policy. And one thing Bernice King said in a conversation with me down here is, let's get back around the table again. We don't talk to each other. We don't talk at home anymore. We don't have dinner with our families around the table anymore. And young people today are really in a bad shape. They depend on TikTok and all of this. That's what they know. And the parents say, well, I can't talk to him because he's doing. No, you're in charge. And so that's. I hope I answered your question, but that's
Yes, you did.
strongly about us talking to people about their purpose. And that was one of the things about Mrs. King was her purpose, and she talked about unconditional love. And I was just impressed all the time about her determination and what we call today her stick-to-itness. Despite everything and all the people that rallied against her, she knew what her purpose was, and she acted on it.
Well, Ms. Crenshaw, you have known what your purpose was in working with young people, and all I can say, we are grateful to you. You are simply amazing. Your continued work in the movement, preparing the next generation, truly is outstanding, and thank you so much. Well, there's still more to come, but first, Mrs. King said, when you are willing to make sacrifices for a great cause, you will never be alone. She had many sisters in the movement, and they were never alone because they supported each other. Here is a birthday message from Mrs. Merle Evers Williams.
Coretta, my dear friend, happy birthday today. I just want you to know that there are so many of us that love you so dearly. We miss you, but your spirit is always here with us. Be blessed, my darling. We love you. Again, happy birthday. This is your buddy, Merle May, as she used to call me. Merle Evers. I'll always love you. The times, the dreams, the nightmares, everything that we share together, continue to rest in peace.
It wasn't that it wouldn't work. It's that people didn't follow the proper steps and are trying to achieve it. Because there are a set of principles and there are a set of steps in the methodology that we were taught and about nonviolence. And when we follow those, they work. It may take a while. But in order to have a peaceful solution and a lasting peace, it has to be a nonviolent approach. Martin's message and his meaning was so powerful, and his spirit, I felt, needed to be continued. I mean, I know that people's spirit lived on, but I think in a very positive, meaningful way that young people would know that influence was being continued. And so I felt that my role then was to develop an institution, to institutionalize his philosophy, his principles of nonviolence, and his methodology of social change. What I've tried to do is to empower people to understand that they can make a difference, and by using the method of nonviolence as a way of life, I mean, it becomes internalized into your life. And so everything that you seek to do, you use those principles and those steps, based on those principles and the steps, the methodology, so that if you have a problem, a conflict in whatever it is you're doing, you're able to better resolve that. And if it's dealing with people, certainly you know how to resolve that, to become reconciled and to move forward.
Love. Now, I know many of you saying, what do you mean by love? Because people have so many different understandings of love. What I am talking about is not the powerless, the weak, and the anemic love. No, no, no. I'm talking about be love and implement the demands of justice. Be love and use your power to correct everything that stands against love. The urgency of now is to dig in and create the beloved community by rising up to be love.
Let's go forward in this moment and bridge the divides. Let's go forward to create the beloved community. Let's go forward and rise up to be loved.
Welcome back. Tonight is about honoring Mrs. Coretta Scott King on what would have been her 95th birthday. Thank you all for joining us. Now, if you missed any of tonight's earlier conversations, you can actually go to any of the King Center platforms and look at it there and share it. So now we're going to welcome more guests, and I'll introduce them before we start questioning. Please welcome Dr. Bernice A. King, Chief Executive Officer of the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change. She is a reverend, a lawyer, and global thought leader, and the youngest child of Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King Jr. These beloved community events were her idea to foster courageous conversation on those things negatively impacting the beloved community and finding solutions. Our next speaker is Joteka Edie. She is the founder and CEO of Full Circle Strategies, LLC. Her firm is committed to advancing transformative change around the world. She has more than 20 years of experience in policy, advocacy, and movement building. Also participating tonight, Tamika Mallory, a native New Yorker who is an organizer, a social justice leader, an advocate for human and civil rights, criminal justice reform, and police accountability. She recently served on the transition committee of New York Mayor Eric Adams. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. And I'm going to go back to something that Mrs. Crenshaw said, and that was how she learned from Mrs. King to have stick-to-itiveness and to not let other people's opinions stop you from reaching your goals. I'd like to hear from each of you. What have you learned from Mrs. King that has helped you in your career? Tamika.
Oh, what have I learned? There's been so many lessons. And, I first of all, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. And to Dr. King and my sister, Joteka, I love you so much. And I'm so glad to be with you.
So before you answer the question, Tamika, I just want to say to everybody, she just had a death in her family. And so let's keep Tamika in prayer. She came on in spite of it. So my sister, I appreciate your sacrifice. And if you have to leave from us, we certainly understand. So
it's okay. It's funny because I said to my mom and sister, I said, well, I'm supposed to be on this thing. And they said, well, why you didn't say that? And they finally hung up the phone. So they're handling it and I'm going to get back to them. But this is important. So I'm glad to be here. And thank you for the condolences. So, I think, when I think about the lessons, the soul of a nation piece is so important because oftentimes I sit with, what am I supposed to be doing? What exactly is supposed to happen in this moment, especially when it gets difficult and you kind of feel like the movement goes into these lulls. And particularly while I was within the Women's March, I had those moments. Am I supposed to be here? Is this something that, we should even be doing? How do we organize with all of these women who are coming from so many different backgrounds? And it is the first time that I heard the quote about us as women becoming the soul of the nation if we want to see the nation become all that it should be. And so hearing that, I realized it gave me power. It made me really feel like I am doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And that as a woman, I have a responsibility to the rest of the world, not just our people, not just our youth, but to the rest of the world, to be a shining light and to ensure that other women are uplifted because we truly are the soul of this nation. But I know that not a lot of folks want to give us that. So we have to fight for our position and for that role. And so I think that's been one of the lessons. The lessons is that we don't get to retreat. We have to continue to push forward because this is, in fact, our job to make this world be what it is supposed to be. And so I guess that would be the big lesson for me.
Joteka?
Well, first of all, it is absolutely an honor to be here with all of you, and especially you, Dr. Bernice King, and my sister, Tamika Mallory. We have been in the trenches together for many, many years. So it's beautiful to be here. And I really, and to just really be in this space with, Becky Pringle and Dr. Janetta Besh Cole and Ms. Crenshaw. I mean, I literally was listening and just capturing all of these gems. And it leads me to a lesson that I gained from Ms. King. And it is a quote that I often think about. It's the quote, and you talked about it already, Monica, is that struggle is a never-ending process. Absolutely. It is never ending. And most importantly, though, what she said was that freedom is never really won, and you have to earn it, but you win it in every generation. And that lesson for me is a call to action. Right. It's a call to action for every single generation to recognize that we have a role to play. I'm 43 years old. I'm aging myself a bit, but I used to walk around, and I'm sure Tamika's done it. I know other friends have done it before. I used to walk around years ago and say, oh, I wish I was born sometime like 1940, 1930, because I would have been in my 20s in the height of the civil rights movement. I was born out of my time. I should have been born then. But when I think about this powerful lesson that Miss Coretta Scott King has taught us, is that actually, Joteka, you were born exactly when you were supposed to be born, because there is work for you to do in your generation, that the baton is forever passed on, and it is up for us to recognize that while we must always honor and we must pay homage to the legacy that came before us, it is important for us to recognize that it is not there just for us to just pay homage to, but to learn from and to carry on. And that's a real powerful lesson. It's for us not to just sit around and just think, oh, I was born out of my time. I should have been at the March on Washington. No, actually, I should have been planning the Women's March, or I should have been planning the March for Jobs and Freedom in 2010, or I should have been marching and fighting for voting rights in 2022, because we still have these struggles and these fights. And so that's an important lesson. And the second thing that I would say, and I've heard women who have poured into me and mentored me, such as Mignon Moore and Donna Brazil, talk about how Mrs. King poured into them. And this notion, and Mignon Moore talks about this often, to lift as you climb. And they always talk about how Ms. King would sit with them, would talk to them, and would pour into them. And that's also a powerful lesson, that as we grow, as we move through movements or whatever we're doing, that is important for us to understand the importance of lifting as we climb, because it goes back to that notion of that important lesson that freedom is won in every generation. And we have to pour into the next generation and ensure that they're prepared and that they have not only the resources and the knowledges, but the tools and inspiration and support to lead in the manner in which we need in order to get free, because it's a constant struggle.
Dr. King, you have a very, how shall I say, you have a double vision when it comes to Mrs. Coretta Scott King, as your mother, but also as an example of someone who builds a legacy. What did you learn from your mother on both fronts?
Well, it's easy to kind of reconcile it because what you see is what you get. She was very consistent personally and publicly. No pretension there. And I appreciate what both of my sisters have said and who they are in these times, because Joteka is right. We are here, each one of us are here at the designated time God would have us here. And I often explain to people that the quote that Joteka mentioned about struggle being a never-ending process, freedom never being won, and earning it and winning it in every generation, it means that every generation is called to the freedom struggle. No generation is exempt. Now, individuals may want to say, hey, I opt out. But the generation is never exempt, because each generation is called to make their contribution to this ongoing freedom struggle, to help to preserve and advance, preserve the freedoms that we have gained and advance further. But when I think about my mom, I mean, to be able to see a woman who was the picture of, on the display of hope, determination, and resilience. I remember her specifically saying to me on a number of occasions, baby, the darkest hour is always before the dawn. What she helped me to understand is that in this world, we're going to go to some dark places. It's going to get very challenging. It's going to look like our back is against the wall. And it's very easy to feel like you're helpless and to lose a sense of hope. But she assured me that no matter how dark it gets, there's going to be a daybreak. There's going to be a dawn. And so we have to continue to move forward. We have to continue to work, because the beauty of it is that we have a constant companion in God, and God's aligned with the work that we're doing. God's aligned with good, and God's aligned with what's just, and God's aligned with what's right. And as we stay in the vein of that and in the flow of that, there will become those kairos moments, which means it's not something you can calculate on the exact clock, the time. It's going to happen on May the 1st at 9 o'clock. But you can be assured that on the calendar of the universe that God controls, that he's going to intersect with our efforts, and there's going to be an acceleration. We just don't know when it happens. So that's why we cannot stop and we cannot give up. And so that's what I learned from her, that you just have to keep moving forward, because as you do that, the work and the faith that you have, he is going to meet us in the midst of that, and we're going to make the progress. But we can't just sit back and say, well, you know, we're just going to wait on time. We have to do the work, because God has the work through human vessels.
I'm going to read another quote of your mom's that I think is really appropriate. To me, the beloved community is a realistic vision of an achievable society, one in which problems and conflict exist, but are resolved peacefully and without bitterness. In the beloved community, caring and compassion drive political policies that support the worldwide elimination of poverty and hunger and all forms of bigotry and violence. The beloved community is a state of heart and mind, a spirit of hope and goodwill that transcends all boundaries and barriers and embraces all creation. Why can we not get to her definition? Who would like to go first? And how can we get to her definition?
Uh-oh.
Dr. King?
Why can't we get there?
Why can't we get there?
Well, part of it is we have not been exposed to it. We have not been educated about it. A lot of people haven't heard what you just said. But even as they hear that, we can't get there because, number one, there's not enough energy focused in getting us there. You have to have, without a vision, the people perish. If we don't have a collective vision of where we're going collectively, not only will we take a lot of different routes, we'll end up at a lot of different destinations. And so the first thing is we got to get clarity on that vision. I think the second reason is something that my father said. He said that the tragedy still of human history is that the children of darkness are often more determined and zealous than the children of light. As much good as those of us of light, those of us who stand in the pathway of pushing for justice are doing, there is this lack of energy and focus and zeal and strategy and coordination and connection that is happening at the same level that those who are doing the works of darkness. And so I believe that we have to figure out how to better strategize, coordinate, connect, and get some of the egos that we have in our community out of the way, because that's been one of the real struggles through centuries. I mean, this happened in my daddy's time. It's been our serious struggle. But I think, because I'm seeing it, I'm seeing something emerging. It's not quite there yet, but I'm seeing something that's emerging that is going to break us out of some of that. But that's one of the reasons that I believe is that there's just, let me tell you, people who do evil works, they work overtime.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Overtime.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I wonder if they sleep.
Mm-hmm. Well, they have
Joteka?
I'm sorry. Joteka,
Go
you can
ahead,
go
yes.
first.
Go right ahead, sis.
I was going to say there's a schedule. They're on a schedule. There's folks that's up in the day, folks that are up at night. They have a 24-hour schedule. And I know that because during the time that we were organizing the Women's March and other major efforts that I've been involved in, we can tell just by the energy of what happens on the internet, how determined and how well they are resourced and how well their messaging is. It is relentless. And where we might go to bed at, say, 11 or 12 o'clock, or try to go and have family time and do some of those things, they have another schedule, another group of individuals and apparatus that is in place that continues to work towards misinformation. It continues to work towards demonizing and being divisive within our groups and in our space. And I wanted to just give my 2 cents on the issue of why we can't get there. I think it's so important that Mrs. King said there's conflict that can be there, but there are ways to deal with it, right? So I think that one of the reasons why we are struggling with getting to this place, this beloved community in the way in which she described, is that so many of us are afraid of conflict. And we, as soon as we hear and see that someone doesn't agree or that we are all not moving exactly the same, for a lot of us, we're sensitive in that it's like it's over. The whole thing has been blown up. People can't work together because, I don't like who you associate with, or I'm afraid it's going to cause me to lose my funding if I'm friends with you, and then I can't be seen in this room. And I think the plan should be to walk down this street and you're trying to, and we have a struggle, a hard time being able to work through that conflict. And as you said, Dr. King, putting those egos to the side where each one of us won't win every battle. Sometimes we have to be willing to take the leadership of others who may be in the room, whether they be the younger people, the newer people, the more radical folks that come to the table. Maybe it's those who are more seasoned and have a real understanding of the path that should be taken. We have to figure out how to be able to work through conflict and to be able to find, or at least to stay committed to the idea that even when we don't agree, our mission is too important to retreat because we don't get along or because we don't see eye to eye. So I think that is one of the biggest things that holds us back from reaching that place and really just aspiring to be in that place, because we're locked into our own emotional feelings and how we show up in spaces. We're too inflexible in my judgment.
That's quite good. I have to ask our strategist who's on our panel, how do we get past this, Joteka? What do we need to do?
Well, I agree with everything that Dr. King and Tamika shared. I think also taking a step back, that one of the barriers to getting to the beloved community is just the idea of believing and knowing that we can actually embrace and get there. If you don't even believe that that can actually exist, then we're never going to get there. And I think that's a part of a barrier that we have to overcome. We have to be able to visualize and to wholeheartedly believe that it's possible. Because if you don't believe that it's possible, then you're not going to do the work to actually get there. And I think that is something that we struggle with. We struggle with people actually believing that we can actually get to a place that Mrs. King outlined. That is absolutely possible. And I think it's possible, and it takes work. Yes, it takes us speaking truth to power. It takes us, being open to, making the conflict visible when there is a conflict. it's not easy to get to the beloved community, but the beloved community is a place in which, quite frankly, we all thrive, where people are truly able to be their whole authentic selves, to be apologetic about who we are, our blackness, about who we are as women, as Black women, as a people. And most importantly, we are in a place and a position where it is equitable. And it is a place where love, because when we think about this word beloved, love is a primary word in here, where love is thriving. But I think that society has gotten away from this idea that it is even possible, and we're somewhat pessimistic, rightfully so. And some would say, when we look at the reality that even still in 2022, that we're fighting voter suppression laws, that we still on almost a weekly basis are seeing Black and brown bodies gunned down for no reason, unarmed, by police every single week, that we continue to see economic disparities, that we continue to witness gross inequities in our education system. So we see all those things, but what we have to recognize is that when we're bold, when we decide that we're going to fight, and when we decide that we are going to come together and put aside our differences so that we can actually reach the beloved community, that is when we're on the path of victory.
And Monica, can I just add one other thing too? I think it's also important that we learn to approach things not always on the defense, but on the offense. I think a lot of people come to the table ready to fight. I mean, it's like a constant flight. And we have to learn to guard against the energy of those who want to keep the fight going, because that's happening too, infiltration. And so people just at each other, and the very thing that we are all desirous of, even if we don't have clarity on what it exactly means, just in theory though, there are these forces that come and just keep us doing this with each other and get our eyes off of the very thing that we're trying to accomplish. And then it's about the fight. And it's not about the vision and the goal.
And I could, I know you probably want to keep going, Monica, but this one is
I want you to talk. I want you to talk.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that 100%. And I think we probably, even as people who are in the movement, have to be more real about our own trauma, right? The fact that we're showing up as organizers, leaders with trauma that exists. First of all, we have generational trauma that we as a people deal with every day. But in addition to that, there is specific trauma that some of us come to. Some of us show up in the movement after having gone through a tragedy, which is how we become leaders. Others, because of the communities that we come from, that we've never processed what we have been through. We've never processed some of the challenges that happen even in the movement. You've got people right now who are the face of campaigns and working within certain spaces that have been harmed or have harmed other individuals right in this space that we're all trying to work together. And there really has not been a space designed to bring those individuals to sit down and heal. Exactly. And so how do you lead when you're hurting and you don't even know how to address your own personal pain? And then, it's almost like going to Thanksgiving dinner, knowing that the person who may have assaulted you as a child is going to be there, and the family has not addressed that issue, but everybody expects you to sit there and smile and laugh and have a good time. And then when you have an attitude, they say, what's wrong with you? And we deal with that in our family. So I think even within the movement family, there is some healing that has to happen so that we can be all that we should be to create a beloved community. Because the love that Joteka, that you spoke about, it has to exist within us as well. It can't be something that we teach and don't practice.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Well, that brings me to this question then. We as women, what are some of the key ways we need to strategize? What are some of the key ways we need to organize and mobilize? Because what Mrs. King talked about, women are the soul of the movement. So what do we need to be doing now when we see, as someone said to me the other day, I feel like I'm living in the 50s and 60s again. How do we organize and mobilize with this new generation of young women like you three?
I think, Joteka, I want to have you to speak first because I know both Tamika and I have been a part of something you've been doing, and I know Tamika, you do a lot in that. But I like to hear some of what Joteka's thoughts are on that.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I think as women in this generation, this moment, we win together, and it goes to a movement that we all are part of. Hashtag Win with Black Women, and just the essence of what that means. I certainly know and believe that every single one of us, particularly as Black women, we have a role to play in this generation, in this moment, as we are dealing with all the struggles that are around us, that we all carry power. All of us, no matter where we are, we carry power, whether it's in our families, whether it's in our church, in our community, whether it's in our social organizations, our sororities, wherever it is, we carry power. But I am of absolutely what I know for sure is that as Black women, we win together and America wins with us. So I think the first thing that we have to do is to just be connected to each other.
Yeah.
To make sure that we are not only lifting each other up, but making sure that we are constantly pouring into our sisters, supporting our sisters, being an echo chamber for our sisters, being an advocate and a voice in this moment for Black women across America, not only in politics, not only making sure that we have a Black woman who is the vice president of the United States or a Black woman that's sitting in the Supreme Court, or making sure that we get a Black woman in the U.S. Senate and a Black woman in the governor's house, but making sure that we have Black women in the C-suites of all of these major corporations, that we have Black women that are producing and executive producing and shaping the images that we see in entertainment, that we have Black women that are coaching in sports, that we have Black women who are shaping the music that we are either listening to or we're dancing to, that there are Black women that are in the pulpits that are pouring into our soul, that we as Black women recognize that there is a place and a space for us and our leadership at every single table in this country. And that in this moment, that it is important for us to be bold and unapologetic about not only our desire, but our demand to rightfully take our seats at all tables. And I think in this moment, it's important for us to be connected. It's important for us to not only be bold and to be represented, but it's also important for us to give ourselves individually the grace to make sure that we are also protecting our spiritual, mental, physical peace in the process as well.
And Monica, I just want to add, because I know our time is coming close. I wanted to add to what she just said. I think it's also important for us to understand that of all the groups that you can identify in our country, when we talk about every category, whether you're talking about race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, what have you, the only group that I know of that is the most inclusive is Black women. When we're in a room, we think about the others.
That's right.
When everybody else is in the room, they don't necessarily think about the others.
That's right.
So because we are wired that way, we have the capacity to create a global agenda to address those things that affect us. But at the same time, when the outcomes happen, it benefits everybody. And so I think that's what it's going to take for us to come together and really strategize and come up with a collective agenda to deal with these issues that we are talking about.
Love that quote. When Black women are in the room, we think about the others. Tamika, do you have any final remarks?
You know, as the two of my sisters were speaking, I was thinking about young girls. It just, was coming to me in my heart that these young girls, they are leaders, they are creative, they're bold, they're beautiful, and sometimes overlooked. And I think that if we want to be the organizers that we say we are, we have to do what not just Coretta Scott King did, but let me just say that Dr. Bernice King does it as well, to pour into young women, to take the time, whether it's in a hotel lobby where I'm talking her ear off for 2 hours about all my struggles in life, and she listens and follows up, whether it be showing up in spaces and trying to be a voice of reason, just being available to think through strategy, to process. She's that. And there are so many other women. I think about Cora Masters Berry. I think about Hazel Dukes. I think about just so many women. You mentioned Mignon and Leah Daughtry, and the list goes on of those women who have certainly helped to bring what you see in front of you and Joteka and me to today. And we have a responsibility to reach to the younger women. And I'm not talking about, the 20-something-year-olds, because we're doing that. I'm talking about the 10-year-olds, the 7-year-olds, the 8-year-olds, these younger girls who know what it is that they need, but they just have not been given platform and a space to be a part of our organizing work. And so at Until Freedom, I'll say this and be done in my organization, we always say that the people who are most impacted have to be at the center of the solution building, that they have to be the voice in the room. So how can we plan and organize and strategize on behalf of younger people, young women, young girls, if we don't bring them to the table to allow them to have voice in the planning and in the strategizing of what will happen with their lives? I think the more we build young leaders, the better we will be as not just women, but as a society in general. So that's
the beloved community approach that she just said.
And I think what's important, as you said, connecting the generations, bridging that gap, because we can learn from the past to focus on what we're doing now, but then to grow to the future. Ladies, you have been amazing. Mrs. Coretta Scott King is smiling down at you and our other participants for what you've brought to us this evening. So thanks to all of you, our participants, for your thoughts. And thanks to all of you who are watching. I'm going to end our session with a quote of Ms. King's that to me is a good way to end this evening. She said, quote, "I am fulfilled in what I do. I never thought that a lot of money or fine clothes, the finer things of life, would make you happy. My concept of happiness is to be filled in a spiritual sense. And that is a very important part of the beloved community." Thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your evening.